The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks of the neighborhood. Two sisters walked side by side, backpacks slung over their shoulders, earbuds dangling but not in use. They weren't in a rush. School had let out an hour ago and they'd taken their time, chatting about a teacher's odd joke, debating what to cook for dinner, laughing at a meme one of them had saved. It was one of those ordinary days that feel like nothing special until they become something you remember forever. They'd grown up just a few blocks away, in a house with a small front yard and a porch swing that creaked when you rocked too hard. Their mother always said, "Walk like you belong wherever you are," and they did. Not with arrogance, but with a quiet kind of certainty. They didn't need to announce themselves. They just were. The shortcut through Maple Park was their usual route home. It cut 10 minutes off the walk and passed under a line of old oak trees that shaded the path even in summer. Most days it was peaceful, just the sound of birds, distant traffic, maybe a dog barking. But today, as they rounded the bend near the rusted swing set, the air changed. A group of older kids stood near the path's narrowest point, blocking the way. There were 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls, all wearing hoodies despite the warm weather, laughing too loudly, eyes scanning for someone to mess with. The sisters slowed but didn't stop. They'd seen this kind of thing before, not often but enough to know the drill. Keep your head up. Don't show fear. Don't give them the reaction they want. One of the boys stepped forward, smirking. "Hey!" he called, voice dripping with fake friendliness. "You two lost?" The older sister glanced at him, then at her younger sibling, and gave a small shake of her head, just enough to say, "Don't engage." But the group wasn't looking for a polite exchange. They wanted a show. "Why you always walking like you better than everybody?" Another boy chimed in, puffing out his chest like he was trying to fill a role he'd seen in too many movies. "You think you're special or something?" The younger sister tightened her grip on her backpack strap. She wasn't scared, not exactly, but she felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the one that came when people tried to shrink you just because they felt small themselves. The older sister didn't flinch. She just kept walking slow and steady, as if the group were nothing more than a puddle to step around. That seemed to annoy them more than shouting back would have. "Yo, I'm talking to you," the first boy snapped, stepping right into their path. For a second, everything froze. The breeze stopped. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. The sisters halted, not because they were intimidated, but because there was literally no room to pass. The younger one glanced around. No adults nearby, no other students, just trees and silence. "You got a problem?" The older sister finally asked, her voice calm but firm. Not loud, not shaky. "Just clear." The group exchanged looks, surprised she'd spoken at all. They'd expected silence or stammering, maybe tears. Not this. "Yeah, I got a problem," the boy said, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked slightly. "You act like you don't even see us. Like we're invisible." "That's funny," the older sister replied, "'cause you're the one blocking the sidewalk." A few snickers broke out from the group, but they were nervous laughs. The dynamic had shifted and they could feel it. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. One of the girls in the group muttered something under her breath, something sharp and mean, and took a step closer to the younger sister. Before anyone could react, she shoved her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble back a step. That was the line. The older sister didn't yell. She didn't swing. She just moved, fast but controlled, stepping between them like a door slamming shut. Her eyes locked onto the girl who'd pushed, then swept over the whole group. In that moment, something in her expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Like she'd just realized these kids weren't even worth the energy. "You really think this makes you look strong?" she asked, voice low but carrying. "Pushing someone half your size? Standing in a pack so you don't have to face anyone alone? That's not power. That's just sad." The words landed like stones in still water. One of the boys looked down at his shoes. The girl who'd shoved shifted her weight, suddenly unsure. The younger sister straightened her jacket, took a breath, and stood shoulder to shoulder with her sister. No words needed. Their unity was louder than any comeback. The group hesitated. The bravado was crumbling. They'd come looking for an easy target, someone who'd crumble under pressure. But these two? They stood like trees, rooted, unshaken, not even trying to prove anything. Finally, the first boy muttered, "Whatever," and turned away, shoving his hands in his pockets. The others followed, slower now, their earlier swagger gone. They didn't run. They just walked off quieter than they'd arrived, as if the wind had been knocked out of them, not by fists, but by something harder to fight: dignity. The sisters waited until they were out of sight before continuing down the path. Neither spoke for a full minute. Then the younger one let out a shaky laugh. Did that really just happen? Yeah, the older one said, adjusting her backpack. But it's over now. Back home, their mother was stirring a pot on the stove when they walked in. She took one look at their faces and knew something had happened. She didn't ask for details right away, just poured them each a glass of lemon water and said, "You okay?" They nodded, and in that moment they were. Not because they'd won, but because they'd stayed true to who they were. Calm, grounded, and unbroken. Later that night, as they sat on the porch swing, the younger sister asked, "Do you think they'll try it again?" The older one rocked gently, the chains creaking softly. "Maybe. But if they do, they'll learn the same thing. You don't have to be loud to be strong, and you don't have to fight to win." The street lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor called their dog inside. Life went on, but something had shifted, not just for the sisters, but for everyone who'd witnessed what happened in those few minutes under the oak trees. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to play the game they've set up for you. And in that refusal, you give others permission to do the same. That evening, as the stars began to appear, the sisters didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They'd already said everything that mattered, with their silence, their stance, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The next morning came with the usual sounds: birds chirping, a distant lawnmower, the soft hum of the refrigerator kicking on. Inside the house, the younger sister tied her shoes slowly, her fingers fumbling just a little. She hadn't slept well. Not because she was scared, but because her mind kept replaying the moment from the day before. The shove, the silence, the way her sister had stepped in without hesitation. It wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was the strange weight of knowing something had changed. At breakfast, their mother set a plate of toast between them. "You two good?" she asked, not looking up from the coffee she was pouring. "Yeah," the older sister said, buttering a slice. "Just tired." Their mother nodded. She didn't press. She knew better than to treat yesterday like a crisis. To her, it wasn't about danger, it was about character. And her girls had shown plenty of it. The walk to school felt different this time. Not tense exactly, but charged, like the air before a summer storm. They took the same route, past the same oaks, but now every rustle of leaves made them glance up. Not out of fear, but awareness. They weren't looking for trouble. They just knew it might be looking for them. When they reached the school gates, a few students turned to look. Whispers followed them down the hallway. Someone had filmed part of the encounter on a phone. The video hadn't gone viral. There was no music, no dramatic zoom, but it had spread through group chats and lunch tables. By second period, half the school seemed to know what happened. The older sister kept her eyes forward. She didn't smile for attention or scowl at rumors. She just moved through the day like any other, answering questions in math, trading notes in history, laughing quietly with a friend during lunch. But people watched. Not in a creepy way, but with curiosity, like they were trying to figure out what made her so steady. The younger sister noticed it more. She saw the glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when she walked by. At first it made her shoulders tense, but then she remembered what her sister had said on the porch. You don't have to fight to win. So she walked taller, not to show off, but to show herself that she wasn't shaken. By midday, the group from the park hadn't shown up. Rumor had it they skipped first period. Some said they were suspended. Others claimed they were just lying low. But the truth was simpler. They were embarrassed. They'd gone looking for an easy win and walked into something they didn't understand. Calm confidence that didn't crack under pressure. That kind of quiet strength was harder to mock than loud defiance. Then, during lunch break, it happened again. The sisters were sitting under a tree near the back of the quad, sharing a bag of chips when the same boy from the park appeared at the edge of the grass. He wasn't with his group this time. Just him, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavy. He didn't approach right away. He just stood there watching. A few students nearby noticed and started whispering. The older sister saw him out of the corner of her eye but didn't react. She kept talking to her sister about a song they'd heard on the radio that morning. Finally, the boy took a few steps closer. He stopped about 10 feet away. "Hey," he said, voice lower than before, less performative. The older sister looked up, not with suspicion, not with anger, just waited. "You think you're better than us?" he asked, but this time it sounded less like an accusation and more like a real question. She tilted her head slightly. "I don't think about you at all," she said simply. "Not in a mean way, I just got my own life to live." He blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. He'd come ready for a fight or maybe an apology from them, something to restore his pride. But this was disarming. "Then why'd you talk to us like that?" he asked. "Because you pushed my sister," she said, voice steady, "and because you stood there like you thought that made you tough." "It doesn't. Real strength doesn't need an audience." He looked down at his shoes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the younger sister spoke, surprising even herself. "You don't have to be like that, you know?" He looked up confused, like trying to make yourself feel big by making others feel small. She added, "It doesn't work. It just makes you lonely." He didn't respond right away. But something in his expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough. He nodded once, turned, and walked away. Not running, not sulking, just leaving. Later that afternoon, a teacher pulled the older sister aside after class. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," the sister replied. "But I hope they're okay too." The teacher smiled. That's the kind of thinking this school needs more of. Back home that evening, the sisters sat on the porch again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Their mother brought out 2 glasses of iced tea and sat on the step between them. "People are talking," she said after a while. No, the younger one said. "You handled it well," their mother said. "Better than most adults would," the older sister shrugged. "We just didn't let them decide who we are." Their mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's the hardest thing to do, and the most important." Inside the house, the TV played softly in the background. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm. Cars pulling into driveways, kids calling to each other from yards, the smell of dinner drifting from open windows. No one declared victory. No trophies were handed out. But something real had happened in those 5 seconds under the oak trees, and in the quiet moments that followed. The bullies hadn't been humiliated. The sisters hadn't become heroes. But a line had been drawn, not with anger, but with clarity. And sometimes that's enough. Because real change doesn't always come with shouting or drama. Sometimes it starts with a single moment of truth, spoken calmly, lived consistently, and ripples outward in ways no one expects. That night, as the younger sister lay in bed, she thought about the boy's face when he walked away. There was no shame in it, just confusion, and maybe the first crack in a wall he'd built around himself. She fell asleep hoping that crack would grow, not because she wanted to see him fall, but because she knew what it felt like to finally breathe after being trapped in your own pride. And somewhere down the street, maybe he was thinking about her words too. By the 3rd day, the story had taken on a life of its own. Not because anyone posted it online or made a spectacle, but because people kept talking about it in hallways, at bus stops, even during gym class. It wasn't the kind of gossip that fades by lunchtime. This stuck around because it didn't fit the usual script. There was no fight, no screaming. No one got suspended. Just 2 sisters who stood their ground without raising a fist, and a group of older kids who walked away quieter than they came. Teachers noticed the shift first. In the cafeteria, students who usually sat alone were now being invited to join tables. In study hall, someone who'd been mocked for speaking softly raised their hand to answer a question, and no one laughed. It wasn't that everything changed overnight, but something had cracked open, just enough to let a little light in. The sisters didn't seek attention. They still sat in the same spot at lunch, still walked home the same way, still rolled their eyes at their little brother's terrible jokes. But now, when they passed certain kids in the hallway, those kids nodded, not out of fear, out of respect, and that was different. One afternoon, a girl from the freshman class approached the younger sister after art class. She hovered near the door, twisting the strap of her bag before finally saying, "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure," the younger sister said, wiping paint off her hands. "Yesterday, someone said something mean to me in the locker room," the girl said quietly. "I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. Felt stupid. You're not stupid, the younger sister said right away. Sometimes standing there is the hardest part. But you knew what to say. You weren't scared. I was, the younger sister admitted. But my sister taught me that being scared doesn't mean you have to act small. You can be afraid and still choose who you want to be in that moment. The freshman girl looked down, then back up. How do you learn to do that? Practice, she said with a small smile. And people who believe in you before you even believe in yourself. That conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it stayed with both of them. Later, the freshman sat with a new group at lunch, kids she'd never talked to before. She didn't say much, but she stayed, and that was a start. Meanwhile, the group from the park had mostly disappeared from the usual hangouts. One of the boys transferred to another school. The others showed up sporadically, keeping to themselves. No one punished them. No public shaming. But they seemed to carry a new kind of weight, one that came from realizing they'd misjudged someone badly. And worse, that everyone saw it. One teacher started a new discussion in advisory period. Not about bullying exactly, but about assumptions. Why do we think we know someone just by how they look or walk or talk? She asked the class. What if the quiet kid is the strongest person in the room? No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who she meant. At home, life went on as usual. Laundry piles, burnt toast, arguments over the TV remote. But their mother noticed little things. The way her daughter spoke about school now included more names, kids they'd never mentioned before. The way the younger one held her shoulders, less hunched, more open. The way the older one paused before answering tough questions, like she was choosing her words not just for herself, but for the effect they might have. One evening, their uncle came over for dinner. He'd heard bits of the story from a neighbor and asked, half joking, "So you two started a revolution or something?" The older sister laughed. "Nah, we just didn't let someone else write our story for us." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he was saying. "That's how real change starts," he said. "Not with a bang, with a choice." The next week, the school announced a student-led forum on respect and community. It wasn't a punishment or a reaction. It was something the student council had been planning for months, but now it felt urgent. They asked the sisters if they'd be willing to share a few thoughts. They said they'd think about it. That night they talked on the porch again, wrapped in hoodies against the cool air. "Do you want to do it?" the younger one asked. "I don't know," the older sister said. "I don't want it to feel like we're showing off. But what if someone hears us and feels less alone?" The younger one said, "Like that girl in art class. What if we say something that helps her stand a little taller tomorrow?" They sat in silence for a while, listening to crickets and distant traffic. Finally, the older sister said, "Okay, but only if we keep it real. No big speeches, just truth." "Deal," the younger one said. The following Monday, a counselor pulled the older sister aside after class. "I just want you to know," she said gently, "you didn't have to handle that the way you did. Most people would have yelled or run or called for help. There's no shame in any of that." "I know," the sister replied, "but I also knew who I was raised to be, and that mattered more than what they thought of me." The counselor smiled. "Hold on to that. The world needs more of it." As the week went on, more small moments added up. A boy who used to make fun of others started holding the door open. A group that always excluded newcomers invited someone new to sit with them at lunch. No one made a big deal out of it. But these weren't accidents. They were echoes, and the sisters? They kept walking home the same way, past the same oaks, past the same swing set. Sometimes they saw kids they didn't know nod at them from across the street. Sometimes they didn't see anyone at all, but they never walked faster, never looked over their shoulders. They moved through the world like they belonged because they did. What happened in those 5 seconds hadn't just changed their day. It had reminded an entire school that strength isn't always loud, that dignity doesn't need a spotlight, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself, fully, quietly, unshaken. And in a world that often rewards noise over truth, that kind of calm courage was rare enough to ripple far beyond a park path or a school hallway. It wasn't about being heroes. It was about being human, and showing others that they could be too. Document Part 4, 1400 words. Weeks passed, and the buzz around what happened in the park faded into the background hum of school life. New rumors surfaced about a surprise pop quiz, a canceled field trip, a surprise snow cone truck showing up on a hot Friday. But something quieter had taken root beneath the surface. The sisters noticed it in small ways. A nod from someone who used to avoid eye contact, a seat saved at lunch by a kid they barely knew, even a teacher slipping a note into the older sister's folder that just said, "Thank you for modeling grace under pressure." But the real shift came from an unexpected place. One rainy Thursday, as the bell rang for last period, the younger sister lingered in the library to finish a project. Most students had already rushed out, eager to beat the downpour. She was packing her bag when she heard footsteps slow near the study carrel. She looked up. It was one of the girls from the group, the one who'd shoved her that day. She stood there, hood dripping, hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying but from lack of sleep. She didn't say anything at first, just shifted her weight from one foot to the other like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. The younger sister waited. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She just gave her space. Finally, the girl spoke, voice low and rough. "You ever feel like you don't know who you are anymore?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the rain outside. The younger sister closed her notebook slowly. "Yeah," she said, "but usually it's because I'm trying to be what someone else wants me to be." The girl nodded, like that hit close to home. She took a step closer, then stopped. "I didn't think you'd talk to me. I don't hold grudges," the younger sister said. "But I also don't forget." Another pause. Outside, thunder rumbled softly. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," the girl said, not as an excuse but as a confession. "I was just mad. At everything, and you two looked like you had it all figured out, like nothing could shake you. And I hated that." "Because you felt shaky inside?" the younger sister asked gently. The girl looked away, then back. "Yeah." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the patter of rain on the library windows. "You don't have to be tough all the time," the younger sister said. "Nobody does. But pretending to be someone you're not, that just makes you lonelier." The girl swallowed hard. "I don't even know how to start being real." "Start small," the younger sister said. "Say one honest thing today, to yourself or someone else. That's enough." The girl nodded like she was storing those words somewhere safe. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "I'm sorry." The younger sister didn't say it's okay right away, because it wasn't really about forgiveness, it was about understanding. "I accept that," she said instead. "And I hope you find your way back to yourself." The girl gave a small, shaky smile, her first real one in weeks, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "You think your sister would talk to me too?" "Maybe," the younger sister said. "But only if you're ready to listen, not just talk." The girl nodded again and stepped out into the rain. That evening, the younger sister told her sister what happened. They were chopping vegetables for dinner side by side at the kitchen counter. "She didn't ask to be friends," the younger one said. "She just asked how to stop feeling lost." Their mother, stirring a pot nearby, didn't look up, but her voice was soft. "Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they're wrong." The older sister wiped her hands on a towel. "I'll talk to her if she wants, but not to fix her. Just to remind her she's not alone." Later that week, the two met during lunch break, just the two of them sitting on a bench near the track field. No audience, no expectations. The girl talked about home, about pressure, about how she'd started acting out because it felt easier than admitting she was struggling. The older sister listened, really listened, not to respond, but to understand. At one point, the girl said, "You never seemed scared of us." "How?" "I was," the older sister admitted. "But fear doesn't have to steer you. My mom always said, don't let someone else's chaos become your emergency. So I stayed calm, not because I was fearless, but because I chose what mattered more, protecting my peace." The girl stared at the ground for a long time. Then she whispered, "I want that." "You already have it," the older sister said. "You just have to stop running from it." After that, things didn't magically fix themselves. The girl still had rough days. She still snapped at her little brother, still skipped homework, still felt lost sometimes. But now she reached out, to a counselor, to a teacher she trusted, even to the younger sister once, just to say thanks. And the sisters? They didn't treat her like a project or a trophy. They treated her like a person, flawed, trying, human. Back in the neighborhood, other changes rippled outward. A parent at the grocery store stopped their mother to say her daughters had inspired her to talk to her own son about respect. A coach started team discussions about how real strength includes kindness. Even the local community center began planning a youth listening circle. No lectures, just space for kids to speak and be heard. None of it was loud. None of it was staged. It just grew, quietly, from one honest moment. One night, as the sisters sat on the porch again, the younger one said, "Do you think we changed anything?" The older sister thought for a moment. "Not us, we just stayed true, but maybe that gave someone else permission to do the same." Their mother joined them with 3 mugs of hot cocoa. She didn't say much. She just sat between them, shoulder to shoulder, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. In the end, healing wasn't about grand gestures. It was about a shove met with stillness, a question met with honesty. A rainy afternoon in a quiet library where 2 girls chose to see each other, not as enemies, but as people trying to find their way. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. Not with a bang, but with a conversation no one expected to happen. Document Part 5, 1,400 words. Spring had fully settled in by the time the student forum arrived. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and blooming jasmine. And the school courtyard, usually just a place to rush through between classes, had been transformed with folding chairs, a small wooden stage, and a banner that read "Voices That Matter." It wasn't fancy. No spotlights, no microphones at first, just a circle of students, teachers, and a few parents who'd heard about what was happening and wanted to listen. The sisters hadn't planned to speak that day. They'd agreed weeks ago they'd only share if it felt right, not because they were expected to. But when the student council leader looked out at the crowd and said, "We've all seen what happens when we choose silence over truth. Today, we choose differently," something in the older sister shifted. She raised her hand. When she stepped up to the front, she didn't walk like she was on stage. She walked like she was heading to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. Calm, unhurried, real. The younger sister stayed in the front row, knees drawn to her chest, watching with quiet pride. "I'm not here to tell you how to act," the older sister began, her voice steady but soft enough that people leaned in to hear. "I'm just here to say what I learned." She paused, looked out at the faces, some curious, some nervous, some familiar. "A few months ago, my sister and I were walking home. Some kids tried to make us feel small. They thought because we didn't yell or run we were weak. But the truth is, we weren't trying to prove anything. We were just being who we are." She didn't dramatize it. No villainizing, no heroic music in her words, just honesty. People keep calling it bravery, but it wasn't. It was just knowing your worth. My mom taught us that early. You don't have to shout to be seen. You don't have to fight to be respected. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand still and say, "I won't let you define me." A few students nodded. One girl wiped her eyes quickly. "But here's what I didn't expect," the older sister continued. "After that day, people started talking, not just about us, but about themselves. About how they've been treated. About how they've treated others. And that's when I realized, real change doesn't start with winning. It starts with waking up." She glanced at her sister, who gave her a small smile. "My sister says strength isn't something you have. It's something you choose, every single day. Even when you're tired. Even when you're scared. Especially then." She stepped back from the center, but before she sat down, she added one last thing. "Don't wait for a moment like ours to decide who you want to be. Start today. With one kind word. One honest look in the mirror. One time you choose peace over pride." The courtyard stayed quiet for a beat, then someone clapped. Then another. Not a roaring ovation, but something warmer. Recognition. Afterward, students lingered. Some came up to the sisters, not for autographs or photos, but to say things like, "That reminded me of my grandma," or "I'm going to talk to my brother tonight," or simply, "Thanks for saying it like that." One boy, who'd once laughed along with the group from the park, stood at the edge of the crowd. He didn't approach, but when the older sister caught his eye, he gave a slow, serious nod. She returned it. No words needed. In the weeks that followed, the forum sparked more than just conversation. A group of students started a peer listening club. No adults, just trained teens offering a quiet space for classmates to talk. The school updated its conflict resolution program to include student voices. Even the lunchroom monitors began using de-escalation phrases instead of just sending kids to the office. But the real victory wasn't in policy changes. It was in the everyday moments no one filmed or posted, like the day the girl who'd shoved the younger sister sat with a new student who'd just moved from another country, just to make sure she wasn't eating alone. Or the afternoon the younger sister saw a freshman being teased near the lockers and walked over, not to confront anyone but to say, "Hey, you dropped your pencil," and then stayed to chat like it was the most natural thing in the world, or the quiet pride in their mother's eyes when she overheard her daughters talking about how to support a friend going through a hard time, not with advice but with presence. One evening, as the family ate dinner, their little brother asked, "Are you guys famous now?" They both laughed. "No," the older sister said. "We're just us." "But you changed stuff," he insisted. "Maybe," the younger one said, "but not by trying to be heroes, just by being human." Their mother reached across the table and squeezed both their hands. That's the kind of legacy that lasts. Months later, as school let out for summer, the sisters walked home one last time before break. The path through the park was bathed in golden light, the oak trees full and green. Kids played on the swings, laughing. A couple of freshmen waved as they passed. Life had moved on, but not without leaving traces. They didn't talk much that day. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said, in actions, in choices, in the quiet courage of showing up as yourself, even when the world tries to shrink you. Back home, their porch swing creaked as they sat side by side, watching the sky turn pink. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. A car door slammed. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. But in that stillness, something extraordinary lived on. Not in headlines or hashtags, but in the way people looked at each other now. With less judgment, more curiosity, a little more grace, because in the end the story was never about bullies or heroes. It was about two sisters who refused to let fear write their story, and in doing so gave others permission to rewrite their own. And that kind of ripple? It doesn't fade with the seasons. It grows, quietly, steadily, like roots beneath the soil, holding everything together when the wind blows hard. They sat there until the stars came out, not saying a word, just being exactly who they were, exactly where they belonged.